Hello everyone, Lid here. So in this video I'm testing Harbinger. So in total I'm testing 150 maps and I've done that in 3 sessions with 3 different setups. For the map itself I'm using Jungle Valley and it's chiseled to 20% and auto and reroll until you have minimum 85% quantity. And the Jungle Valley itself is mainly for the altars, but I don't think that's mandatory. And for the Atlas tree, I'm using 2 different Atlas tree. And for the first and second sessions, this is the Atlas tree that I'm using. This Atlas tree is just basically focused on the Harbinger and some of the scraps just to get a little bit more loot from the maps. And the reason why I'm not taking Beyond on the first and second sessions, because number one, I don't think Beyond adding that much. When I check the tainted currency, it doesn't worth that much. And because ground loot on this league is kind of bad, I don't think the Beyond contribute that much. But I do bring the Beyond on the third session just to confirm, is it really worth it to add Beyond on the map? And the second tree, I'm taking Beyond back, and this is for the third sessions. But for the Beyond node, I'm not really focusing too much on the tainted currency. The purpose of the Beyond is just to add more density into the maps and hoping that we get more ground loot and scarabs. That's about it. And for the scarabs, for the first session, I'm using 3 Harbinger scarabs, 1 Warhord and 1 Regency. I think that's the standard use for Harbinger. And for the second session, I'm using 2 Harbinger Scarabs, 1 Warhord and 1 Regency, and 1 Obelisk. So the Obelisk is a new Scarabs for Harbinger, and what it did is it's going to add Obelisk into your Harbinger. And when you kill the Obelisk, it will give you Harbinger loot. And for the Obelisk itself, it adds 1 to 3 Obelisks per Harbinger. So I do see a Harbinger with multiple Obelisks, and the quantity of item drop from Obelisk is very similar to normal Harbinger. And for the third sessions, I will go back to the 3 Harbinger, 1 Warhord and 1 Regency, and we'll talk more about that one on the spreadsheet. So with that said, let's move to the spreadsheet so I can talk a little bit more detail about the number. So this is a spreadsheet, and let's talk about the first session and second session first. And I do put a highlight over here for the loot that coming from Harbinger. And for the loot itself, I tend to ignore the fracturing orb and shard just because this item is very rare. And because I'm only doing 150 map and I don't think that's a big enough sample size. So I will focus more on the annulment, enchant orb and chaos orbs, and probably also exalted orb. But the exalted orbs I think is pretty consistent throughout the 3 sessions. I think on the second session and third sessions, I do get raw exalted orb drops, so these 2 extra is from the ground loot. And from the session 1 and session 2, I kind of assumed that the obelisk is worse because I'm getting less chaos orbs. But when I do my third sessions, I'm getting a little bit more confused because I get less chaos orb, and I think I forget that chaos orb is pretty common items, and it's very likely that the difference here is because of the ground loot. So you do get quite a lot of chaos orb in like 50 maps. So I think the differences here is coming from the ground loot. On the third session, I probably get less ground loot, which is kind of weird because on the third session, I do add Beyond packs. But we talk about the Beyond a little bit later on. So based on the data from these 3 sessions, after take a little bit deeper look on it, I think Obelisks basically give the same amount of loot with Harbinger Scarabs. So in terms of loot itself, I don't think there's a difference between Obelisk and Harbinger Scarabs. With that said, now the difference between Obelisk and Harbinger Scarab is just basically with Harbinger Scarab you get more monster because you get 3 additional Harbinger, so you get more gold, which is basically confirmed in this one and this one. We do get more gold, and because we kill more monster, it's also mean that we have more potential with ground loot, which is kind of true. We do get a little bit more scarabs, we do get a little bit more maps. But the T70 just ignore it. This is mostly just RNG. I think on the third session, I'm getting a little bit unlucky on the Abominations map. In terms of ground loot, I think the Obelisk does give a little bit less. I think the Scarab is also the same thing. I do get more Scarabs on the third session and the first sessions. But on the upside, I think Obelisks have 2 upside. Number 1 is cheaper. So Obelisk costs 1C and the Harbinger Scarab costs 4.7. It's basically 5C. And the other upside for Obelisk is time. So the map with Obelisk is 30 seconds to 1 minute faster based on the testing, because you do lose 3 Harbinger from the normal from the Harbinger Scarabs. So the map is just a little bit faster, and that 30 seconds to 1 minute difference I think is significant, because if we're talking about per hours, we're talking about 2 to 3 maps differences. Like in this case, the map average time for me is 4 minutes, And for the Harbinger one is 5 minutes. We're talking about 15 maps per hour for the obelisk and 12 maps per hour for Harbinger scarab. So the time I think is significant. 30 seconds to 1 minute is quite a big differences. And from the perspective of ground loot, I don't think the ground loot is really worth that much. The differences on like maps and also scarabs, I don't think it's that big of a difference. So considering that the map with obelisk is faster, I think the obelisk is a better choice. I don't think the loot differences is comparable with the time differences. And based on all of that, I think obelisk is a better choice just because it's cheaper and it's faster. And for the Beyond itself, looking at the tainted currency, I really don't think the Beyond is that much of a value. If we total everything over here, it's probably around like 1 to 2 div. And we do get more maps, we do get more scarabs, but considering that with the difficulty that it adds and the time it adds, I mean, we're talking about difficulty and time, it's really depending on what build you use. For some build, it can make no difference. Like in my build, adding Beyond and not is really not making that much differences. In that context, Beyond is just an extra loot, right? But for another build, it can make a difference. It can make the map harder, it can make the map longer. In that case, I really don't think Beyond is worth to take just because I really don't think it is contributing that much. Just because the tainted currency is not worth that much. And the second one is grounded is really, really bad this leaks. And that make Beyond, for me personally, I don't think it's worth to use. But once again, it's really depending on the build. If your build can do Beyond no problems, it doesn't really add that much difficulty based on the build, then I mean just add Beyond. It's just basically extra loot. But if adding Beyond, it makes your maps harder and it basically slow you down, I think dropping the Beyond is probably a better choice. And with all that said, I really hope this data is helpful. And let me know in the comment below if you have any questions. I'm also curious, what do you think about this format? Because most of the time I'm not showing all of this. This kind of happened in the background and I'm only showing you one option where I think that option is the best. So let me know in the comment what you think about this format. I'm curious to know what your opinion is. So thank you everyone for watching and I will see you in the next one.